An airstrike on another humanitarian target in northern Syria leaves at least 4 aid workers dead. A medical facility in rebel-held Aleppo was hit during the night, killing 2 nurses and 2 ambulance drivers. Also on the programme this lunchtime, voting's closed in the Labour leadership contest. The results announced on Saturday, but Owen Smith appears to have already conceded defeat.
I won't be serving in Jeremy's cabinet, but I will do what I've always done, which is be Labour, vote Labour, loyally serve this party, make sure that from the backbenches I continue to make the arguments I've made during this campaign.
Superbugs, one of the biggest threats to global health. All UN member states are to sign an action plan to fight drug-resistant infections. The death of a 15-year-old boy, a coroner says neglect by one of England's largest mental health trusts was partly to blame. Brexit has had no major effect on the economy so far, says the Office for National Statistics. And embracing body art, employers are warned that negative attitudes towards tattoos could mean they're missing out on new talent.
Here in the south, calls for tighter security in Poole after an Afghan teenager evades security checks to make it to England. And the angry residents who live near a controversial biogas plant say they face 6 months of misery.
Good afternoon and welcome to the BBC News at 1. The head of a French-based charity has called the killing of 4 of its workers in Syria a deplorable act. 2 nurses and 2 ambulance drivers died when their medical facility near Aleppo was hit in an airstrike last night. It comes after America blamed Russia for the attack against an aid convoy 2 days ago. US officials said that was an enormous humanitarian tragedy and told the BBC that 2 Russian warplanes have been responsible for the attack. Richard Galpin reports.
The recently agreed Syrian ceasefire has brought something of a lull in the ferocious fighting which has destroyed so much of the key city of Aleppo. But another major attack overnight on a medical clinic in a rebel-held area has further undermined hopes for peace.
The news coming through that we have another attack upon selfless people doing amazing work trying to help people in need who have humanitarian, life-saving and protection needs is completely unacceptable. And given that all these static medical facilities, the coordinates are given to all the warring parties, it is absolutely outrageous that they're being attacked.
Monday's attack on this UN aid convoy near the city, which left more than 20 drivers and aid workers dead, has destroyed all hope of supplies getting through to those most in need anytime soon. What happened here could amount to a war crime, and the major players involved in the Syrian conflict are all blaming each other for it. A senior United States government source has told the BBC that 2 Russian warplanes were responsible for the attack. Russia has angrily denied this, saying its planes were not in the area at the time. Likewise, the Syrian government denies any involvement. As for opposition forces who are being blamed by the Russians, they say they don't have the capability to carry out such an attack. And meanwhile, the Americans say they're certain it was an airstrike, which means it could only have been either Russian or Syrian warplanes.
We hold the Russian government responsible for airstrikes in this space, given that their commitment under the cessation of hostilities was to certainly ground air operations in places where humanitarian assistance is flowing.
In response, the Russian Defense Ministry has released this video taken by one of its drones tracking the UN aid convoy as it made its way to a warehouse on the western outskirts of Aleppo. It highlights the presence of opposition forces going past. This apparently to bolster its case that the opposition may have been behind the devastating attack. But despite this blame game, diplomatic efforts to try to save the faltering ceasefire are continuing at the United Nations in New York. Later today, the UN Security Council will be meeting in the hope they can prevent a full resumption of the Syrian civil war. Richard Galpin, BBC News.
Well, leaders are in New York at the moment for a summit on Syria. Our chief international correspondent, Lise Doucette, is there. And not surprisingly, very strong condemnation of this latest attack on a medical facility.
Well, your viewers would be forgiven for being absolutely confused about a situation which yesterday we had the UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon saying that the situation in Syria had sunk to a new low, a new level of depravity, he said, with the attack on a humanitarian convoy. And here we are again today saying that now there has been an attack on a medical facility. The humanitarian convoy was moving, so perhaps that was a bit difficult. There could have been a mistake, although it's not believed that there was. A hospital is a fixed position. The coordinates for the hospital were given to all sides, the coordinates for that humanitarian convoy. It is incomprehensible. You heard Stephen O'Brien, the UN humanitarian chief. He walked by us here just a short time ago. He's absolutely furious. And that's the kind of mood in which people will go into that UN Security Council meeting today. And there's another worry. Not only does Syria go lurch from crisis to crisis day in, day out, but in these crises, it was always believed that it was Moscow and Washington, Sergei Lavrov, the Russian foreign minister, John Kerry, the US Secretary of State, who could come together, use their personal relationship and, of course, their power to try to bring everyone back to some common sense and try, however difficult, to move forward. But now these tensions are also rising between these two world powers. They will keep trying to do something, but as every day goes by, everyone knows just how impossible it is, but just how crucial it is that something be done to sort Syria.
Lise, thank you. Voting has ended in the contest to choose the next Labour leader, but we'll have to wait until Saturday to find out whether the party has backed the current leader, Jeremy Corbyn, or his challenger, Owen Smith. Both candidates have spoken of the need to bring the party together, whoever wins, after months of political drama. Here's our political correspondent, Glenn Campbell.
Jeremy Corbyn elected as leader of the Labour Party.
It's only a year since Jeremy Corbyn stunned the Labour establishment, winning a comprehensive victory in the last leadership election. Since then, he's built a mass movement. Labour's membership has never been higher. But while these crowds may be convinced Mr Corbyn's the best man to lead Labour, a majority of the party's MPs never really have been. Much of his shadow cabinet quit, and there was a vote of no confidence in his leadership by the parliamentary party. They hoped it would force Mr Corbyn to go, but he put together a slimmer, less experienced front bench and decided to fight on.
2 hours left to go.
The challenger is Owen Smith, a former shadow work and pensions secretary. And as the campaign drew to a close this morning, he did not appear to be preparing himself for victory.
I won't be serving in Jeremy's cabinet, but I will do what I've always done, which is be Labour, vote Labour, loyally serve this party, make sure that from the backbenches I continue to make the arguments I've made during this campaign.
So what are the differences between the candidates? On the EU referendum, Jeremy Corbyn accepts the Brexit vote means the UK will leave the EU. Owen Smith wants to revisit the decision in a second referendum or a general election. On nuclear weapons, Mr Corbyn wants to scrap the Trident submarine programme. Mr Smith voted for renewal of the UK's weapons system. On the shadow cabinet, Mr Smith wants MPs to elect Labour's frontbench team. Mr Corbyn, who appoints shadow ministers, thinks that party membership should have a say in future. The rival campaigns have been working the phones to win support. But in recent days, Team Corbyn has seemed increasingly confident.
So for every call you've made, every tweet you've sent, every Facebook message you've put, all those things, fantastic. Together we are very, very strong. Thank you very much indeed.
There's a widespread expectation that Jeremy Corbyn will win. But whoever finds himself in charge when the results announced on Saturday will face an unenviable task of trying to unite the Labour Party and build a team that can provide effective opposition here at Westminster. Glenn Campbell, BBC News.
Our assistant political editor, Norman Smith, is in Westminster. And after all these months of drama, can the Labour Party be united?
Well, Sophie, all leadership contests tend to be a bit like family rows. They can be very bitter and divisive, but this one really has been like the full-on family feud over Boxing Day when all the old grudges and grievances have come out. And it's been personal because There aren't really those huge policy differences between Mr Corbyn and Mr Smith. They're roughly on the same political page on the left of the party. It's been about personality and Mr Smith's conviction that he's better equipped to lead the party, to manage the media, to unite it. And today, actually, he got some surprising support from Mr Corbyn's first wife, who said she'd be voting for him because she thought Jeremy Corbyn not really up to it, and actually he hasn't changed any of his views since the 1970s. All of which said, most people think Mr Corbyn is on course for victory, perhaps by an even larger margin. But that is only the start of the challenge he will face. Can he unite the party? And there the signs are not very encouraging. Already some of his critics are talking about further challenges to his position, while some of his supporters are talking about deselecting, getting rid of those MPs, all of which I think goes to show it can often be a lot easier to start a family feud than to end it.
Norman Smith, thank you. Well, the official leadership result will be announced on Saturday. You can watch it on BBC Two and on the BBC News channel on Saturday from 11 a.m. A coroner has ruled that neglect at a hospital in South London 2 years ago contributed to the death of a 15-year-old boy. Chris Brennan, who suffered from mental health problems, was admitted to a unit in one of England's largest mental health trusts. But despite repeated incidents of self-harm, the coroner says staff didn't take his actions seriously. Well, Angus Crawford is at the coroner's court for us now. Angus.
Selina Lynch, the senior coroner for South London, ruled that there had been gross failures in management and they had contributed to Christopher's death. She said two of them were glaring. One was a failure to have a proper risk assessment, another a proper care plan, something described in court itself by one consultant who gave evidence as indefensible. His family say he always had a beautiful smile on his face. Christopher Brennan loved animals, was good at boxing and had a wicked sense of humour. But at 13 he started to hear voices. They told him to hurt others and himself. He would self-harm, often swallowing objects, once drinking bleach. After years of treatment at home, he was admitted to a psychiatric hospital, where in August 2014 he died. Despite being on a locked ward with round-the-clock care, on several occasions Christopher swallowed batteries and coins and had to be taken to accident and emergency. The hearings here were told that 6 weeks after he was admitted, he choked to death on the cap from a deodorant bottle.
The coroner has found today that our beloved son and brother Chris died as a result of gross failings by the South London and Maudsley NHS Trust. This is the most recent finding in a growing number of child deaths in psychiatric hospitals across the country as a result of neglect. Not one more child should be allowed to die in this way.
This inquest has raised questions about whether basic procedures were carried out by staff. The South London and Maudsley NHS Trust has yet to comment on the case. Christopher's family say they simply want to know the truth about the death of a boy they describe as the light of their lives. The coroner also highlighted what she called a real problem in the culture at the hospital, that psychiatrists worked separately to nurses, not in a team, that there was low morale, that they'd become desensitised and that staffing levels were a problem. The coroner also said that this case showed cumulative and continuous failure.
Angus, thank you. The Mayor of Charlotte in North Carolina has appealed for calm after a night of protests at the police shooting of a black man. Police said they had retrieved a gun the man was holding, but the family said he only had a book in his hand. Authorities used tear gas to disperse protesters in an overnight demonstration that left about a dozen officers injured. A man has been charged with planting bombs in New York and New Jersey at the weekend. 31 people, including one British national, were injured when a bomb went off in the Chelsea neighbourhood of Manhattan on Saturday. Ahmed Khan Rahami had already been accused of attempted murder after 2 officers were shot during his arrest. Superbugs, infections that have become resistant to treatment by drugs, pose one of the biggest threats to humanity. Some experts think that unless something is done, even some simple infections could soon become entirely untreatable. Now, every member of the United Nations, all 193 countries, is to sign up to an action plan that it's hoped will stop the overuse of antibiotics. Here's our medical correspondent Fergus Walsh.
Antibiotics are the miracle medicines on which we all rely at some point, but their overuse means they're one by one losing their ability to kill bacterial infections. The misuse of drugs to fight parasitic or viral infections like malaria or HIV is also a major global health threat. At least 700,000 people a year die from drug-resistant bacterial, viral or parasitic infections, such as TB, HIV or malaria. Left unchecked, it's thought that could rise to 10 million deaths a year by 2050. The UK has been at the forefront of a campaign to get global action on superbugs, and the UN declaration is a symbolic step. It acknowledges that superbugs pose a wide-ranging health threat to women giving birth, to newborns, those undergoing surgery or cancer treatment.
Klebsiella, so you can see.
Microbiologists have repeatedly warned that antibiotics are losing their potency, and so urgent action is overdue.
It is a real threat. We have patients every day in UK hospitals and everywhere else throughout the world who have drug-resistant infections that they're not treated with the first drug or the second or the third, and sometimes they're not treatable at all. And if these are very sick patients, they are dying.
The UN has committed to encourage innovation in developing new antibiotics, improve diagnostics so that drugs are given only when needed, and to educate health staff and the public on how to prevent the spread of infections. There are no specific targets for governments, the pharmaceutical or agricultural sectors, and the key will be to convert good intentions into action.
Well, Fergus is with me now. Good intentions into action. Can this action plan work?
Well, I think there is some political momentum behind this issue now. The G20 a couple of weeks ago released an encouraging statement. But when we get down to the nitty-gritty, can, for example, the United States and China be persuaded to put the sort of curbs on the use of antibiotics in animal production, in farm animals, that we've seen in Northern Europe? That will be a big question. Again, can we persuade countries like India, the #1 user of antibiotics, to stop selling antibiotics without prescriptions? I was there last year and was able to buy the last-ditch antibiotic, the one you'd really depend on if you were very sick in hospital, in every pharmacy I tried. And you could buy it just one dose at a time, a real recipe for superbugs to emerge. And finally, can we persuade the pharmaceutical industry to put the money in to develop the new drugs that we need? There hasn't been a new class of antibiotics since 1987.
And the problem is that a lot of people still don't realise the dangers of overusing antibiotics.
Absolutely. I mean, I think in this country, the message is just beginning to get through in the past year or so that antibiotics are not for coughs and colds. We all kind of expect to get a pill when we go to the GP, and we've got to stop that. Message is beginning to get through, antibiotic consumption falling a small amount in the UK. And, you know, we really don't want to be in the era where if you get a cut, it turns into an infection, that there will be nothing left to treat it. And that is what we could face, a return to the pre-antibiotic era.
Fergus, thank you. The time is just coming up to 1:20 our top story this lunchtime. America blames Russia for an attack on an aid convoy in Syria, and 4 more aid workers have died in a new airstrike overnight. And still to come, gay and lesbian sportsmen and women are still experiencing significant levels of verbal abuse, according to research by the charity Stonewall.
And on South Today, calls for security to be tightened at Poole Port after an Afghan teenager manages to get into England in the back of a lorry. And she's already got one under her belt now, the granny from Lymington, who's setting her sights on a new sailing world records.
It's 2 years since care homes and hospitals were given new guidelines about how to physically restrain people with mental health problems. They were designed to reduce the number of incidents following the scandal at the Winterbourne View care home in Gloucestershire. But the BBC has learnt that during that time, the number of restraints has actually gone up significantly, despite NHS England insisting that progress is being made. Here's our social affairs correspondent, Alison Holt.
It happens in seconds.
Knees down.
Arms gripped, forced down, pinned to the ground. This is what face-down restraint looks like in a demonstration, and this is what it feels like.
There was someone pinning my back, and someone holding my head, and other people holding my arms and legs, and I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe.
This is Jane. That's not her real name, as she's asked us to disguise her identity and voice. Jane has bipolar disorder. In the past, she's also been sexually assaulted. The last time she was restrained face down on a mental health ward was 10 months ago. It involved about half a dozen staff. She was suicidal, and a male nurse was assigned to watch her every move.
I got very, very distressed. And then what happens is a restraint team arrives. These were large male nurses, and the weight on my back was crushing my chest. It feels like you're being assaulted.
5 years ago, an investigation by the BBC's Panorama programme showed people with learning disabilities being goaded, then brutally restrained at the now closed Winterbourne View private hospital near Bristol. As a result, in April 2014, the government issued new guidance aimed at reducing physical restraint. It says staff mustn't deliberately restrain people in a way that could have an impact on their breathing, such as face-down restraint. But Jane was restrained after that was introduced, and a Freedom of Information request underlines how little has changed. Just before the new guidance was introduced, just over 57,000 restraints were recorded. But 2 years on, there were nearly 67,000. Better reporting may explain some of that significant rise, but nearly 19% of those restraints were face down. The information was collected by Norman Lamb, the former health minister who introduced the guidance.
Most mental health units around the country are operating on 100% capacity, if not even more. So they're operating under enormous strain, often with staff shortages, with the use of agency staff. So this becomes containment, control, rather than therapeutic recovery. And so we're letting down some of the most vulnerable people in our country in the most dreadful way.
The man in the middle being restrained in this demonstration is Professor Tim Kendall. His health trust in Sheffield has managed to end the use of face-down restraint and reduce physical restraint overall.
Pretty unpleasant, actually. Hard to breathe.
Professor Kendall is also NHS England's new clinical director for mental health. He says they are making progress, but the use of restraint varies a lot between mental health trusts.
For those trusts where they're not changing things in a positive way, or worse still, things are becoming more negative, they really need to take note of this. These are real human rights and ethical issues that they should be thinking about. But for those trusts where they're coming back at zero face-down restraint, for example, my own trust, or Nottingham, clearly have no face-down restraints at all. It can be done.
And for Jane, the biggest single impact of being restrained was she stopped talking to the people she'd hoped would help her.
You don't tell nursing staff or psychiatrists how you're actually feeling, because your main objective is to get out of there as soon as you can. So that includes being discharged when you're still suicidal, because the risk of being restrained in that way is very real.
That report by Alison Holt. Now, Britain's vote to leave the European Union has had no major effect on the economy so far, according to the Office for National Statistics. But its chief economist said the longer-term effects remain to be seen. Let's speak to our economics correspondent, Andy Verity. And there's been a string of upbeat assessments of the economy out today, and they suggest that actually the immediate effect hasn't been quite so damaging as was feared.
Well, that's right. I mean, every bit of data that comes out, I've told you about some of it, it's more upbeat than the gloomy predictions, certainly before the referendum, and flatly contradicting any idea that there'd be an immediate damaging effect on the UK economy. So, for example, they said there'd be a fall in the pound. There has been a fall in the pound. They got that right. But what there hasn't been is a resulting rise in prices, inflation. We haven't had it feed through to inflation, at least not yet. Higher unemployment, they said. No, unemployment's gone down. They talked about trade, but actually the trade position has improved. There's less of a gap now between what we buy in from other countries and what we sell to them. So all of these things have come together, and the Office for National Statistics is saying that actually the economy hasn't fallen at the first fence, as they put it. The longer term effects, as you mentioned, remain to be seen. But the OECD, for example, which was saying that the moment we had a Brexit vote, there'd be damaging effects, well, they've had to climb down a bit, and they're now saying growth in the UK economy will be slightly higher than they thought.
Andy, thank you. Gay and lesbian sportsmen and women are still experiencing significant levels of verbal abuse, according to research by the charity Stonewall. It carried out a survey which suggests 3/4 of British football fans have heard some kind of homophobic abuse during a live match. It also found that many fans said they would be embarrassed if their favourite player revealed they were gay. Here's our sports correspondent Katie Gornall.
It's an ugly problem that sport still struggles with. These fans are hurling homophobic abuse at Brighton supporters. And according to a new survey by the charity Stonewall, this kind of abuse is rife in football. Nearly 3/4 of British football fans have heard homophobic abuse at a match during the last 5 years. The research also found that young sports fans were twice as likely to describe anti-LGBT language as banter. And 1 in 5 18 to 24-year-olds said they'd be embarrassed if their favourite player came out as gay.
It's a wake-up call for everyone in sport that we can't be complacent about this. We have to act now, and we all have to step up as leaders and show the fans and the players right through sport, in every sport, that homophobic, biphobic and transphobic abuse just isn't acceptable anymore.
So far, Thomas Hitzelsperger is the only openly gay player to have appeared in the Premier League. The former Aston Villa midfielder came out after his retirement, and the reaction was supportive.
Fashanu.
But when Justin Fashanu became the first player to come out in 1990, it was the opposite, and he took his own life 8 years later.
There are currently no openly gay male professional footballers in England and Scotland. Now, thankfully, attitudes towards LGBT people has changed since Justin Fashanu was playing. But Stonewall's report underlines that there is still work to be done.
We need to get to that next stage, which will involve educating younger people that when they grow up, it's not okay in schools to call people gay, because those younger people right now are the people who are going to be playing football against my team in 10 years' time.
More is being done by clubs to tackle homophobia. This video was released by Arsenal to support Stonewall's Rainbow Laces campaign.
I can't change that my hair is perfecto.
I can't change my height.
But together we can change the game. Players are lacing up to kick homophobia out of football.
Campaigners believe the real issue behind homophobia is cultural, but whether it's a societal problem or a sporting one, it's one that refuses to go away. Katie Gornall, BBC News.
Employers need to change their attitudes towards tattoos, according to a new report. It says many workplaces consider them unacceptable, yet with 1/3 of young people now having tattoos, the report says companies could be missing out on new talent. John Moylan reports.
They're celebrities who have all made their mark. Tattoos are an intrinsic part of their image. But according to workplace experts, this type of body art is still considered unacceptable in some jobs. At this studio in London, they caution young people who ask for tattoos, which they may regret in the future.
When people come in asking for a visible tattoo, it's definitely a no. These 18-year-old kids are seeing Rihanna and other huge celebrities, Justin Bieber, with these visible tattoos, and thinking, yeah, this is the road that I can go down, not necessarily realising that they're not on the same kind of career path as those people.
According to today's report, as many as 1 in 3 young people now have a tattoo. The authors conclude that firms with a negative attitude to all of this, well, they could well be missing out on a huge pool of talent. Not only do more people have tattoos, but attitudes towards them seem to be changing.
In my country, it's a very big problem. You have tattoos for jobs, but in England, no.
Worked in retail and they said as long as tattoos weren't offensive. And I've done about office work and everyone said as long as tattoos weren't offensive it was fine.
It's an expression at the end of the day and it's just showing who you are does not get in the way of the job that you do, so I don't have a problem with them myself.
Firms can refuse to hire people with visible tattoos. Body art isn't covered by laws on discrimination. But as tattoos move into the mainstream, experts say employers should update their attitudes too. John Moylan, BBC News.
And finally, they say that art imitates life, and to prove the point, the Madame Tussauds Museum in London has confirmed that it has officially separated the waxwork models of Angelina Jolie and Brad Pitt. This is how they looked before it was revealed that the couple are divorcing after 12 years together. Within hours, staff at the museum got to work to ensure that the couple's split was evident. And this is how visitors will see Brad Pitt and Angelina Jolie from today. Very definitely apart now. Time for a look at the weather. John has all of it.
Well, Sophie, I'm going to throw away the computers and put an old wives' tale to the test. It was a red sky this morning in County Down. Thank you very much, David, for your view out of the window here. You know the saying, red sky in the morning, shepherd's warning. Well, we've seen a lot of cloud piling in from the west during the course of this morning across Northern Ireland, thickening up all the while. And yes, it's warning of rain on the way. In actual fact, rain is now spreading across Northern Ireland. It will continue to do so through the rest of this afternoon into western Scotland as well. A pretty wet spell, a pretty windy spell too. Now, further east, a few showers across the heart of Scotland down into northern England, but plenty of brightness as well. And in the sunshine, don't feel too bad. A few showers also across parts of Wales, the Midlands, the West Country. But I want to stress that most places actually will have a fine afternoon. At 4 o'clock, temperatures getting up into the low 20s across the southeast. Very pleasant too, with the winds down here not so strong. A few fog patches perhaps forming across the southeast for a time overnight as this band of rain pushes out of Northern Ireland through Scotland into Wales and western parts of England. Fairly fragmented and light the further south you go, but it's an important dividing line. Behind that, under clear skies later on in the night, we could see a touch of frost actually across Northern Ireland and Scotland in rural areas. Much milder further south and east. Now, tomorrow is an important day. It is the autumn equinox, equal day, equal night, and from here on in, the nights are getting longer than the days. It'll dawn dry and bright for many places, some early mist perhaps across the southeast, but some sunshine to be had here. A band of cloud and the odd shower tracking its way west to east across England won't amount to much, and behind that it brightens up again with lots of lovely sunshine across the north and west before more showers get into the west of Northern Ireland and western Scotland, but most places actually having a fine day. Now, further ahead, we've got another area of low pressure, quite a deep one actually, tracking its way northeastwards across the Atlantic, and that means the weather will go downhill across the northwest of the UK, particularly western Scotland, where we'll see increasing cloud and wind and eventually rain. But most places actually having a fine end to the week with some sunshine. Again, in the sunshine, it should feel very pleasant with the lightest winds across the southeast. But this weather system is going to get sort of hooked up across the northwest of the UK, particularly western Scotland, where there could be quite a lot of rain as we go through the day on Saturday. Again, further south and east there, that front never quite makes it, and some warm sunshine to be had here, widely up into the low 20s. Eventually, that front does move its way west to east across the country through this weekend. It could be a wet start actually across eastern areas on Sunday, but the front doesn't hang around. It clears through, the skies brighten, the sun comes out, but then further blustery showers will affect the north and the west on a cool wind. Again, the best of the temperatures the further south and east we go. A topsy-turvy spell. Sophie.
John, thank you. A reminder of our main story this lunchtime. 4 more aid workers have been killed in another airstrike on a medical facility in Syria. That's all from us. Now on BBC One, it's time for the news where you are. Have a good afternoon. Bye-bye.